using the microphone because they're going to film all this. So, not knowing quite what to talk about, I sort of have crammed 2 or 3 talks together. So what I'm going to do is really scream through about 100 slides and tell you about several projects, watch some short videos, things that I've done and am doing, a bit of background on where I think the U.S. Space program is at, and cram through that for background, and then take questions so we can talk about what you're interested in. So I have never spoken in a planetarium before, and the only other word that sounded like planetarium to me was sanitarium, and I figure you go there to get your sanity, so you must come to a planetarium to get your planet. So I decided to start with this picture. This is one of my favorite pictures. Carl Sagan asked Voyager 1 to turn around and look back at Earth and take a picture of our planet. That's what that little pale blue dot is. That's us. That's everything that has ever happened on this planet. That's all the wars and lovers and crazy people, and everything you can imagine has all occurred on that little pale blue dot. And there's a fabulous piece that Carl Sagan wrote that you can get on the internet when he talks about this idea of the pale blue dot. So I love to talk about that because it helps to sort of put a lot of what we do in perspective, a lot of what Robert does in perspective, giving ourselves a context for the Earth. It's very recent in our history of humanity that we understand this context. And it has radically changed our thinking about what the Earth is. This was a sort of taken off the cuff picture that really began to change people's mind about thinking about the Earth as a system. About this time, the whole Earth catalog came out, and we had things like the Environmental Protection Agency and Doctors Without Borders. A bunch of really interesting change in humanity's thinking came about because of this picture taken during one of the Apollo programs. And of course, we've all seen pictures like this. And one of the interesting things to my mind about looking at pictures like this is that you begin to see the Earth as a system that life has changed. The term biosphere was coined by a man named Vladimir Vernadsky, a Russian geologist, because he needed a name for what he called a geologic force on the planet, and that was life, making geologic scale changes, changing the composition of the atmosphere, changing the composition of the Earth's crust. So he coined that term. But it was really still a new idea through the 90s. And I know that because I was with the Biosphere 2 project, and we were spelling the word biosphere down the phone through about 1992. And it's sort of hard to put yourself back in a time when a concept wasn't in your mind. But to understand the beginning of this talk, which is about the Biosphere 2 project that I was part of, you sort of have to remember when the whole idea of a biosphere was new. Basically, of a biosphere, and it's funny having 2 screens here. A biosphere is materially closed, and the Earth does that by gravity. Biosphere 2 did it by creating an impermeable barrier over a bunch of life, and is energetically open. It gets its energy from the sun, and so life is powered by solar power, as you all know, and is a system that is very interlinked. And we're, of course, starting to discover that it's interlinked. I was in Yap, which is an island in the Western Pacific, last week, and brushed the side of the typhoon that went through. That is clearly one of the most powerful typhoons ever seen because the water was really warm. So things are definitely changing on our planet. So that's what a biosphere is. In the early 80s, the idea came about to say, well, could you build a biosphere? Is it possible to make an artificial biosphere? Can we take these biomes, the desert, marsh, rainforest, savanna, agriculture, city, or habitat, and enclose it all up, and will it work? Now, all of these things evolved on a planetary scale, and if you cover it up, it's obviously got different ratios of atmosphere to land to water, but if you can make an artificial biosphere work, there's all kinds of interesting ways to study life in a big system. So the goal of the Biosphere 2 project was to see, can you make an artificial biosphere? Are they possible? And This was the conceptual idea. This was the state of the art at the time. Professor Claire Folsom was a mentor of mine, had a contract with NASA to see if it was possible to make microbial systems in 1 liter flasks work. And of course, there was all the laughing going on about whether he could do it, but I love this quote from Bert Rutan. He says, research should be defined as doing something where half the people think it's impossible and the other half think, well, maybe that will work. Whenever there's been a true breakthrough, and I really believe this is true, you can find a time when everyone says that's nonsense. So a creative researcher has to have confidence in nonsense at the beginning. And that is true of most things. And so that's sort of the daring that it takes, right? And so when we started talking about making an artificial biosphere, as you can imagine, because this was the state of the art, we had a lot of people saying that's nonsense. The person who sort of pushed us over the edge was Bucky Fuller. He said, and I think this is true throughout history, there is rarely a time when many things come together that have to come together to do an interesting project. You have to have the right people, the right funding, has to be the right time in history, you have to find the right place. When all these things come together, you can do something like a Biosphere 2 project. And so at a conference in 1984, Bucky Fuller essentially gave us the double dog dare because we found that all those ingredients were available to do the Biosphere 2 project. And so thanks to Bucky, we got started on the project. One of the first things we did was to build a small test chamber to see if the systems behaved as we thought they were going to behave in a small enclosed airtight vessel. We had people inside that would stay inside for a few weeks, and they'd get their oxygen from the plants and their waste would be treated. And so far, based on what we saw in this module, Biosphere 2 looked possible. We called this the test module, and we were testing how to make the ceiling and how to make the plants work. All the engineers said that all the life would turn to green scum, and all the life scientists said the engineers could never make a structure leak tight enough to be worthwhile. Fortunately, it turns out that both were wrong. This is the Biosphere 2 under construction. The agriculture areas you saw in the drawing, this is the desert down here. This will be the savanna, the ocean, and the rainforest. And these large tanks here, these domes, are variable volume chambers that allow the air inside the biosphere to expand and contract with temperature change. So it's sort of this variable volume that as the air gets bigger, there's a place to go. It's lined in the state-of-the-art stainless steel at the time, 3.5 acres of stainless steel, all welded up and tested. 65 miles of glass edge seam. So while all that's going on, we had to find a way to train the crew. So one of the things that the crew training, one of the aspects of crew training was to spend at least 3 months on a ship. I actually found out about the project because I was a crew member on this ship when a sister project to this ship was started, which was the Biosphere 2 project. So I heard about the Biosphere project early and had already done my Biosphere training. The other part of Biosphere training was to spend a long time isolated in the outback of Australia. You learn a lot about self-reliance and working in small teams. This is Ed Bass of the Texas Bass family who funded the Biosphere 2 project. And these are some of the coolest people you'll ever meet. The Aborigines in Australia are extraordinary, and I can tell lots of stories later if you want. We had to collect corals and fish for the ocean. I think this is actually me collecting corals in the Caribbean. This is plant collections in Venezuela, Baja California. And so we collect plants, collect the soils and the animals, and assemble them all inside Biosphere 2. As we built the Biosphere, this crane is craning in to, this is the rainforest Tepui, starting to put in the plants. We had to have, of course, the primate friend. This is a galago who hung out. We have several galagos that hung out in the rainforest, mostly in Biosphere 2. So finally, it was all done right about September 26th, 1991. And so we threw a big party. And this is us going inside for our 2-year mission. It's a 2-year checkout cruise of Biosphere 2. And there's me with my hand in front of my face. So now we have two biospheres, and we can actually compare these biospheres. So the Earth, well, they're both, one is the Earth in the solar system. Biosphere 2 is Oracle, Arizona. 126 billion acres and 3.5. 13 wilderness biomes. We had 5 wilderness biomes. We used the 5 main tropical biomes because they run 365 days a year. 10 to 40 million species, 3,800 species, 8. So you can sort of see but it's sort of interesting. Now I can compare how these two things behave. And, we dreamed also of, is there applications for biospheres on other planets? Now we can compare biospheres, and we can have conversations between biospheres. So this is a film of the rainforest shortly after, right about closure. The plants are right up to the top now, but it gives you sort of an idea what life inside the Earth's Biosphere 2, second biosphere, is. This is the ocean of Biosphere 2. Interesting thing about this ocean, it's the first example of bleaching, coral bleaching, ever observed on the planet was in Biosphere 2, and which is what a lot of this research is about. It was because we had higher CO2 levels inside Biosphere 2, and it stressed the corals, much the way the higher CO2 levels on the Earth are stressing the corals. This is the human habitat, our city. That was the kitchen. Now we're zooming along down towards we'll be going into what was our mission control inside Biosphere 2. This is where we all had offices and would meet and try to figure out what was going wrong that day. And talk to people on the outside. This is me in the analytical laboratory that I put together for the Biosphere. This is how we made sure the water was safe to drink and the air was safe to breathe and all of that. And this is below the savanna. This is all the machinery infrastructure required, or this is actually a small portion of it, to keep the air circulating and cool and dehumidified and the water pumping. And there's a huge industrial complex that sits below all the biomes inside Biosphere 2. This is us making a pizza. It took about 4 months to make a pizza. We had meal planning that went 6 months out. Literally every meal had a plan. Of course, we had to grow the food, so you had to plant the wheat, and you had to have a buck that would get the dough pregnant to have kids so that you could get the milk to make the cheese, to make the pizza. So, it was a big process. Making pizza was a big deal. This is the area that it takes to support 8 people with a modicum of meat in the diet. Not a lot, but a lot of the plants that grow in the biosphere, we'll eat the root crop, for example, and the leaves on top go to goats and the like. So you can actually have some animals that are essentially free. They help you use what's growing in your farm. So this is us harvesting peanuts. This room was always locked. It was where we ripened the bananas, feeding the peanut greens to the goats as we ate the peanuts. And this is harvesting beets. Beets did phenomenally well for a large number of reasons, which I could explain later. We had problems with crops except for beets, and I've never been very fond of beets ever since. Biosphere 2 is light powered, right? So we are harvesters of light, and this is us growing sweet potatoes, which we became part sweet potato. Robert was commenting earlier, when I came out of the biosphere, he was there to see me, and that I was sort of bright orange, and it turns out that all the beta carotene in the sweet potatoes, which also did very well, like to deposit in the fatty tissue of your skin, making you orange. This is the air that we breathe comes obviously from all the plants, and we exchange. So we were really becoming part biosphere. I was exchanging carbon with the biosphere. The plants had the carbon that used to be me, and I had the carbon that used to be plants. And in a very real sense, we were becoming part of the biosphere. So what about water? About every month or two, we get 1 cup of coffee from our few little coffee trees, which we relished. Everybody on the outside knew when we'd had coffee because we ran around like crazy that day. Um, so once you're done with your coffee, you secrete it into the waste treatment system, and this is a system that was developed at NASA to anaerobically treat the waste and then aerobically treat the waste. And the water that comes out of this system is good enough to put back on the crops. And so that fertilizes the crops. So we've got the nutrients going back in a cycle, and then the water that transpires from the plants gets into the air, and we drink that water. So about every day and a half, we drank the same water over and over again. And about every 4 or 5 months, we ate the same carbon over and over again. So we were all part of that cycle. Of course, we had a medical facility, and we'd have to do medical checks, and we had lots of interesting medical problems that occurred during the closure as the people tried to adapt to the changing environment. We had to invent all kinds of ways of testing how our bodies were responding to the environment. And of course, psychology was an issue. I think the only things that the entire crew agreed on was that psychology was a problem for all the other crew members. That's about it. So after 2 years and 20 minutes because Jane Goodall wouldn't stop talking about primates in cages, and we were like waving at her saying, okay, we're a primate in a cage. Anyway, after 2 years and 20 minutes, we came out of the biosphere, and I actually got to take a little helicopter ride after coming out and look down at our world that had been our world for those 2 years. And it was a little bit like Bruce McCandless sitting up there on EVA. You know, if those who don't know, you know, he got in huge trouble because they told him to come back, and he was like, I'm having way too much fun. I'm not coming back. He never flew again. So, yeah, exploration, and that Frank White called it the overview effect. When you can see something in a new way, in part, that's what exploration does. And Augustine Picard, in the 30s, flew a balloon to 50,000 feet in a pressure vessel. He's one of the first people. This is what they had for crash helmets at the time. And amazing man. And he has this great quote that I love: exploration is the sport of scientists. So this is some of the first time that anyone began to actually see the curvature of the Earth. At this time, remember, there is no pictures of the Earth. Nobody has ever seen the Earth, much less its curvature. Nobody's been far enough away from the Earth to see its curvature, and he's the first one who sort of just barely maybe saw it. David Simmons and some others, Kittinger and the like, in the 50s, absolutely saw the curvature of the Earth. They're at 70 to 120,000 feet, a series of flights done through the late 50s, early 60s. In this little tiny pressure vessel. This was literally his tin can of a pressure vessel that he went up to 70 and then 100,000 feet in a pressure suit for safety. This was the beginning of the space program. This work was being done to understand how people react to things like the radiation environment in space, and can you make a life support system? So this is the beginning of the field that I'm in, which is human life support for space. And some of the first times that people ever saw the Earth and the celestial sphere that we're in. There's a great part of David's log. He's got 2 logs in the flight, and one is his science log and one is his personal log. And there's an 18-minute gap in the science log. If you go over to the personal log, he's talking about Venus setting. And so he's seeing Venus, a bit of the curvature of the Earth. The light from Venus setting is going into the Earth's atmosphere, just grazing the solid part of the Earth, and then back out of the Earth's atmosphere to him. So he's seeing this sort of double refraction going on. And he writes about it, and it's almost poetry. It's amazing. His mind is being blown by what he's seeing. And he has a color wheel up there so he can help say what color he's seeing. And he says, I can't use this color wheel. There are no pigments on the planet that match what I'm seeing. And it's an extraordinary experience for him that he writes and talks about ever since. He has clearly had some sort of a psychological change. I mean, this has been a very important experience for him to see his Earth with his own eyes. And I think there's something really special about seeing something with your own eyes versus in a picture. I think the observatory that Robert runs, where people can see things with their own eyes. I'm always amazed when I see stars and planet things with my own eyes. This is a project that we're just starting. There's no sound on this thing. There we go. Look at that. Amazing. So a couple of weeks ago, we announced a project that we've been working on for about 2.5 years called Worldview. We announced it because the Federal Aviation Administration decided that Worldview was a spacecraft and would be regulated like a spacecraft, not like a balloon, which is what we wanted. And it's the reason that I'm interested in this is really, I think it's important to give people experiences sort of like what we had in Biosphere 2. An experience that helps people get that we live on a little planet and understand, see it from a distance. This is only 100,000 feet, but it's high enough to see the curvature of the Earth. It's high enough to see the stars. And so this is the craft that we're raising money as a for-profit business to offer this service. And you saw the vehicle. You know, you talk to astronauts, even those who have just been in Earth orbit, just compared to Frank Borman. And you know, it's really an amazing experience. And I think it's one that you know, part of exploring is people coming back to tell about their adventure. So we think obviously there's a market for that. And as the video showed, you launch up in a big balloon, hang out for hours to days, and then come back on a big parafoil back down to a landing site. So that venture is taking a lot of our time, and it's part of a growing field of space tourism, of commercial space. This is a really interesting time in America right now, in the world right now. There are more spacecraft in development now than combined in history up to this era. More spacecraft in active development right now. It's an amazing time. This is Virgin Galactic. This is the Boeing CST-100 offering. This is a cargo carrier built by Orbital called Cygnus. This is the Dragon that SpaceX has done, Sierra Nevada, and there's others here that aren't even pictured. There's a prototype space station that I've got some life support hardware on that's orbiting the world right now. It's been orbiting for like 8 years. Prototype of this Bigelow space station. This is a late 60s capsule that the Russians built called Almaz that was meant to be part of a an orbiting, essentially military base. They had Gatling guns on their space stations then. And there's a commercial venture that's trying to take these capsules and repurpose them for tourism and science. And of course, we have all witnessed the end of an amazing era in space with, this is the landing of STS-135, the last shuttle flight. We've seen the end of the shuttle. We've also seen the end of construction of the International Space Station. Now hopefully this will go to 2020 or 2028, but a phenomenal accomplishment. Most people have no idea what an amazing accomplishment this is. It took we've just crested 1,000 hours of EVA time, 1,000 hours of people in spacesuits to build this thing. It's been continuously operating for over 13 years. It's an amazing feat of in-space operation. The ISS was first conceived. Everybody involved in the planning of the operations was pretty convinced at least one person was going to die building this thing. It really was an amazing accomplishment, and now we're at the end of that. Now we're operating it, but all the skill behind operating the shuttle and all the skill behind building ISS, International Space Station, is now sort of in limbo. What's going to happen to all those people? Commercial space is an interesting venture going on. In this case, commercial means that NASA is essentially guaranteeing business for a company. And I say this is an amazing accomplishment because 4 or 5 years ago, if you talk to the International Space Station program, they would tell you there is no way in heck I am ever allowing some commercial vehicle to come within the approach ellipse of the station, much less dock. It will never happen. They were emphatic that it would never happen. But necessity is the mother of invention, and there is some real flexibility going on in NASA right now. It's a very hard time, but there is flexibility. Of course, there's the Space Launch System that some of you might know about, the Orion spacecraft on top that we're doing a lot of work with. So you might be familiar with SpaceX and their Falcon Heavy and their Dragon. So there's a lot of interesting work going on, but we're sort of lacking a mission. And I like this picture because it's obviously a made-up picture. This is the cupola from the International Space Station, but rather than looking at Earth, it's looking at Mars. And the idea that we could, even in our lifetime, much less very near to now, actually have somebody looking out the window of a spacecraft at Mars with their own eyes is, to me, incredibly compelling. So how do you do that? Well, one of the easiest ways to do that is what's called a Mars free return trajectory. And what that means is that you launch from Earth, you cruise towards Mars, and you get so close to Mars that it bends your trajectory back to Earth, and you come back never having to do another rocket burn at all. So it's sort of like a solar system boomerang. Well, a study was done by Patel, Langusky, and Sims in the late 90s, and in that paper, they had a computer program found what it thought might be free return trajectories. And we saw this paper, and in this paper were these 4 little splotches. We call this the low-hanging fruit. On this axis here, Robert told me I had to pretend everyone here was educated, so I had to have some geeky slides. So this axis here is time of flight. This is the time of the mission. This axis is when these opportunities occur. And so what we're interested in is this late 2017 series of blobs. Turns out that these blobs don't really exist. It takes such huge amounts of energy to make them work that they don't work. But this blob actually does. And it repeats in 2033. So why is there this periodicity to a free return trajectory? So what's happening is that this is the distance of the Earth from the Sun over year to year. And this is the distance to the Sun from Mars. Now so this is Mars close to the Earth, close to the Sun. This is Earth close to the Sun, far away. Well, because of the eccentricity of the orbit, Mars is moving faster when it's closer to the Sun, and the Earth is moving faster when it's closest to the Sun. So if I take off from Earth when it's closest to the Sun, I'm getting the biggest boost I can get from just the sheer speed of Earth. And when I get up to Mars, if Mars is both close, so it's easier to get to, but it's also moving very fast, so it will steal more energy from me, which is actually what I want Mars to do. I want Mars to keep me from continuing out into the rest of the solar system and slow me down, so I fall back towards the sun. And I'll show you this in a graphic in just a sec. I'll show it to you right now, actually. So we leave Earth end of 2017, cut within Earth's orbital circle, come back out, catching up to Mars. We get to Mars's orbit just before Mars does. Mars swings past, steals a bunch of energy from us, and this is what the crew will see. This is 100 times real time. This is the crew coming up towards Mars. Of course, you go by the dark side because you're going around the back side of Mars and then back away. And so we spent 226 days getting this far. And then we'll spend another 270 odd days getting back. So Mars has both slowed us down, so we fall back towards the sun, and bent our trajectory. So then we come back and we cut inside and we get as close to the sun as Venus, so we get nice and hot. We were nice and cold out here. Venus isn't there when we get there, and then come back to Earth at a very high rate of speed, faster than any human object has ever re-entered before. More geeky slides. I'm trying to keep Robert happy here. So there's two things going on here, which is sort of interesting. What creates the launch window? What makes the time that I can do my burn towards Mars, and what makes it too late? What opens and closes the window? Well, so what's going on here is that the amount of energy, called the C3, the amount of energy required, the size of the rocket I need to get on that trajectory is getting down and down and down because I'm lining up those two perigees better and better and better. And then, but as that happens, my re-entry speed as I come back from Mars is getting higher and higher and higher. And so this is about as high as anyone dares re-enter. Now, it doesn't seem like a whole lot because this is 14 kilometers a second, and coming back from the moon, you come back at like 11.5 kilometers a second. But it turns out to be energetically, because energy with velocity is v squared, to be 5 times the heating rate that you would get coming back from the moon. So this is about where everybody at NASA said, yeah, we just don't have materials that can handle that. So the launch window opens when the energy is low enough that we can find a rocket big enough. Launch window closes when I can't figure out how to get back to Earth and not burn up as I re-enter, right? So this creates about a 2-week window of time that I can do the burn leaving Earth. So can we construct a mission around this? What I want to talk about is some work that we've done to construct a mission around this trajectory opportunity, a mission to fly people to Mars and back. So we sort of had to take some, what are the basic parameters of the mission? We're clearly going to take advantage of this rare opportunity. The launch window closes in December 2017. You can actually inject yourself into this orbit up to January 5th, 2018, but for the most part, everything's got to happen in December 2017. Very early on, we said 2 crew, because that's the minimum crew. You could say 1, but the problem with 1 crew is there has to be a man or a woman, and it's there's a lot of safety and redundancy in having 2 people, another person to talk to about something that went wrong, somebody to help you if you get hurt. You get a huge safety and mission assurance bump by having 2 people. So we said 2 people, and we said a man and a woman for obvious reasons. This but properly represents humanity. We're here to inspire young girls just as much as young boys. And, of course, a historic journey to fly within 100 miles of the red planet. This is closer than most satellites, closer than the International Space Station is to Earth. This crew would get to Mars and, of course, return them safely to Earth. And I don't have many textual slides, but a lot of people don't sort of get why. So I happen to believe, and this is my bias, that America should have a leadership position on this planet. I think for the most part we make good decisions about things, and a lot of leadership in the world. I think it's about exploration, and I certainly think we should get there before China, and that's my personal bias. Though I do think it should be an international mission, much like the space station is an international mission. Demonstrate the feasibility of going to Mars. Mars right now is sort of like the sound barrier, right? People say, oh, getting there is so hard and getting back is so hard, we'll never do a Mars mission. So we sort of have to take that dragon off the map. Foster knowledge and experience, clearly retire some of the technical risks, conduct research, inspire a sea change in the American space program. Our space program has become very operationally oriented, and Congress and the administration don't really let NASA take the kind of risks that people in NASA would really want to take. Obviously, inspire people, that's one of our main goals. Enable in-depth public participation. Imagine 500 days with people in a spacecraft, and Earth is just the pale blue dot. Mars is just a pale orange dot. All the interaction you could have, the crew could literally, video con with a 20-minute gap in time into this planetarium. I mean, imagine the students being able to interact with a crew on the way to Mars. Blow everybody's your college attendance would shoot up. It turns out that after the Apollo program, the number of students who went into the sciences, all sciences, doubled. It had a huge impact, inspiring people to do the hard work to get into the sciences, and it fell off since then. This inspiring missions have a very direct and palpable impact in America's competitiveness, and I personally believe we're never going to compete again on manufacturing. We're going to compete by being the smartest and technically most savvy nation on the planet. So these are the whys. There is a backup date, fortunately, because 2017 is very, 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 very close. And, it's getting to the point in working on this where we're really not sure 2017 can happen unless there's a miracle in Washington. And frankly, I've spent a long time in Washington, and I don't think that miracle's going to happen. So there is a extremely rare, and we don't even know when the next time this occurs, opportunity in 2021. That is a Venus and Mars free return flyby. So you can imagine sending a man and a woman to Venus and Mars. It sounds pretty cool, huh? Right. It's 589 days, so it's a bit longer. It's about as hard the launch energies are about the same, and it leaves then. So I'm glad I have a laser pointer. We leave Earth and duck down. We go just a bit closer than Venus to the sun, and then Venus, we've actually dived down away from the screen, and we're coming back up, and then Venus gives us a boost. We fly by Venus in April of 22. Venus looks like this. There's not a whole lot to see on Venus. Then we come back out. We get a boost from Venus. Actually boosts us back out to Mars. The Mars encounter is much like the Mars encounter of the first trajectory. Get a nice view of Mars on your way by. Then you shoot back on a longer trajectory back again inside Earth's orbit, but not all the way to Venus yet, and then approaching Earth, and then return to Earth in 23. So this, we think, is a very interesting backup for us, and I think probably pretty soon we're going to officially really go to this. There's a hearing in Congress on Wednesday next week that I'm on my way to, where we'll be testifying before the House Subcommittee on Space about this mission. So we'll see what Congress decides to do, but don't hold your breath. So what happens to people on this mission? Well, one of the things that happens is you're no longer in Earth's protective magnetic field. And this is obviously a cartoon of how the magnetic field of Earth protects you from not only the solar particle events, a little bit from the cosmic rays, but it's mostly the mass of Earth's atmosphere that protects you from the cosmic rays. But this is our safety shield that we're clearly going to fly right out of. Well, it turns out that your risk of exposure-induced death, i.e. getting cancer from the radiation you were exposed to during the trip, not surprisingly when you think about it, goes down with age. It goes down with age because you're more likely to die of something else. Well, The legal limit for a worker is to have a 3% increased risk of exposure-induced depth for like a radiation worker. So that's what this line here is, the 3% increased risk. We all are born with a 21% risk of dying of cancer, so this just makes it a 24% risk of dying of cancer. And to put that in perspective, that's about like the difference in living in Houston near oil refineries or Austin that doesn't have oil refineries. And, those are the kinds of, it's a far smaller increased risk over smoking, for example. A person who smokes would be better off. They'd have a lower risk of cancer if they just didn't smoke for the mission. So at any rate, one of so that's the galactic cosmic ray exposure. The solar particle events, a solar flare, comes in an oscillation. We're in a very strange part of the oscillation. This graph of solar events, this is where we are about now. We're actually much lower. We're sort of in this area. The sun is surprisingly quiet. When we do the mission, we should be back down at this low ebb again. So the risk of having a solar flare hit us is down, though we've had big events at this low time. So it's a really good time to fly, and there's lots of good things you can do to help shield the crew with water placement equipment and the like, selecting crew. And so there's things, it turns out that the radiation risk is really a manageable, understandable risk. Yeah. In the 2021, it's sort of back up. You're not, the peak is about 23, so you're just sort of coming up on the next one. So it's nowhere near as good in the next time around. But if we're going to do missions to Mars and explore space, not all of those missions are going to occur conveniently at solar minimum. It's just one of those things we have to learn to work with. The medical community has become quite fascinated with this mission. For all of these reasons, but it turns out that pharmacogenomics, i.e. personalized medicine, is something that really plays a big role in protecting the crew. The more we understand about how their genome works and is affected by radiation, the more we can work with the crew to help them before, during, and after the mission. So we got a big support for the medical community. There's visual impairment issues that are starting to come up. Nobody understands why males are having visual impairment issues post-flight and women are not. Another example of female superiority. And of course, there's lots of neurobehavioral factors that are in play. What this is talking about is, it turns out that there was a 500-day, I think that's the next one, there's a Mars 500-day mission where they put a bunch of people in this chamber for 500 days and simulated a Mars mission. And one of the results of that was that a person with really good sleep pattern, they sleep regularly for a good sleep at the right time, performs much better as a crew. It's a predictor of crew performance. And so there's lots of interesting work going on in the psychology of what this mission might be like. Of course, we had all our issues on Bias for 2. It turns out that even though Bias for 2 is huge, we had all the same neurobehavioral issues that people in the Antarctic have or people on the space station have. So certainly psychology of the crew is going to be an issue, and it's hard to know what it's going to be like to have Earth be so far away and just be stuck in your little capsule. So stay tuned for that. So now we get on to designing the vehicle, and I won't spend too long outside of just, we looked at life support systems and how that architects and how much redundancy you have. You looked at how much free volume people need to have over different lengths of time and what's optimal and tolerable. Looked at different ways of getting that free volume and how that spacecraft has to be packaged. Of course, we have to look at the life support system and the human accommodations, the water management, how you purify drinking water from wastewater, managing the air and the toxins that get into the air from people and the machines in the spacecraft. Of course, managing crew waste is a big deal. Food management, we're taking 3,000 pounds of freeze-dried food. All the preppies who are sure that the Earth is going to end have developed a lot of interesting ways of packaging dry food for long periods of time. They're actually very helpful for this project. And of course, the thermal control system has to handle being out at Mars when the sunlight is half of Earth, and all the way to Venus when the sunlight is twice Earth. So there's lots to do just in figuring out how to keep the crew alive. And we're doing a lot of work right now actually with flight-like hardware in our lab, building up ways to remove carbon dioxide, reduce that carbon dioxide to get the oxygen back, produce oxygen from water as well, get rid of trace contaminant control. We have all the major systems being built up in our lab now to start testing for long durations, the life support system. And we're hoping to put together a chamber sort of like this, where you put people in your life support system in and test it for a long period of time. There's very little experience for long periods of time testing these things. See, we're on slide 97. You guys are doing great. So you take all of that and you figure out how to launch it, and you do all your trades with capsules and how to re-enter, and you have your criteria, and you build big spreadsheets, and you figure out concepts of operation, and you model what that free volume might look like. I take all that stuff and package it into a pressurized volume, and this is how much free space the 2 crew gets for 1.4 years. We figure out how to build this capsule to re-enter so quickly. We had sorry for the acronym, the NASA Engineering and Safety Center and the Jet Propulsion Lab independently look at the design of this capsule for re-entering, and they looked at the heating rates and looked at how that energy accumulates inside the system, and it looks like we can do it. We can re-enter at temperatures that equal 2,000 watts per centimeter squared. So you think of a little tiny centimeter, and put 20 100-watt light bulbs worth of heat and energy into that little centimeter, and that's the energy that's being imparted onto the heat shield as it re-enters. Yep, at the 14.2 kilometers a second. Actually, what we end up doing is entering, skipping back out of the atmosphere, cooling off of it, and re-entering again. And one of the main reasons for that is that it's so hard to control the spacecraft coming in so fast that you sort of have to take 2 bites at it just to allow the air in the control system to be sloppy enough to be reasonable. So the spacecraft that we came up with, and believe me, there were many different concepts, were the pressurized vessel that you saw, a service module that has batteries and avionics and communication system and propulsion in it, our little capsule at the other end, and this is what adapts to the launch vehicle. So how do we get it and the crew up? We went through many trades looking at launching fuel tanks and stages to combine so that we can get all the energy we need to leave Earth fast enough. This scenario took 4 launches to occur in a rapid succession. For celestial mechanics reasons, this is verging on impossible to get done. So we looked at the Space Launch System and how we would put our spacecraft on top of a really big upper stage that doesn't exist yet. We looked at what commercial crew providers, this is the companies that NASA is funding to take crew to the space station, might be able to help us with. And here's how the scenario works. We launch on that big rocket. We have our spacecraft here attached to the upper stage of the big rocket into low Earth orbit. The commercial crew provider that wins comes up and brings the crew to the spacecraft. We check it out in low Earth orbit. We make sure everything's good to go. We undock the commercial crew vehicle. We light up the engines, do a big burn to get off towards Mars, then let go of the upper stage. And this is the artist's concept of approaching Mars and flying by Mars, and the crew are looking out their little windows. And so this is 225 days into the mission. And then at the very end, they get in their capsule, get rid of the rest of the spacecraft, and come screaming in. So that's where Inspiration Mars stands right now, and we're looking at finding ways to partner with NASA to do the mission. It's an interesting architecture in that this spacecraft could be adapted to do a range of things. You could put an airlock on it and go to an asteroid. You can reconfigure this spacecraft easily because it's launched under a shroud, and I can always just bring my crew up. So there's a variety of things that can be done, and I can talk about other missions that you can do with this spacecraft architecture, this launch architecture, if you'd like. But really, in the end, I think our goal is to have this picture not taken by Curiosity of the sun setting on Mars, but actually seen by people standing on Mars. Thank you.